I'm down in Houston, Texas, taking a look at the 2026 Genesis GV70, or at least I was before I got home and realized there were a couple audio clips missing. So here I am in studio to tell you a little bit more about the changes that happened in 2026 and why it's not a total redesign. Since this is the top selling model for the Genesis brand, it needs to stay fresh, and fresh is exactly what it is. A few tweaks on the exterior, some major changes on the interior, and I'll tell you all about them. Big and bold has been the direction of this Genesis shield grille, and that definitely stays in place. But what we do see is a little bit more of a complex design to it, and that's because we now have a multiple mesh overlay system kind of happening here. So if you take a quick look at it, it should look pretty familiar, but once you get closer, you'll see there's more texture built in here, but it's done in a couple different ways because we have different colors happening within that multi-mesh, so it doesn't end up getting too busy, but again, definitely some more texture. And there's also a larger distinction between the sport models and non-sport. This one here being the sport means that we get some of the darker accent pieces, where if you get the non-sport model, this is going to be a little bit brighter silver. But the shield grille isn't the only thing that's gotten some treatment. We'll also get some in the lighting department. Now, as you can see, probably just next to me and over there in the turn signal, we have the same split light design that we've seen in the last couple of years, but what we have going on within the headlights themselves is a little bit more intricate because there's a whole new lens array that they're calling the MLA, and this headlight here is much more distinguishable from previous models, and I think it'll stand out on the road. I'll just let you decide whether or not it really is a distinguished look. The overall profile remains the same as do dimensions, so at 185 inches long, it really feels like Genesis is getting a lot out of this footprint, at least stylistically, and they do it in a pretty subtle way. By leaning heavily into the crossover side of things, they're making this, well, the front end at least, very car-like. It's a pretty long hood, but it's also nice and low, and that low line carries all the way here through the rear, ends up actually dropping here just before that C-pillar, but obviously in the C-pillar things get a little bit bigger, but this makes everything just seem a little bit smaller, and in that way a little bit sportier, but all done in a pretty subtle way, and I have to say here on this Sirius Blue, it comes through very, very nicely. Speaking of sport, if you upgrade from one of the standard models to one of the sport trims, you'll go up from a 19-inch wheel up to a 21. And what's interesting about this wheel design is that it's got these two different stripes. I mean, I guess they kind of look like the Dodge logo painted at the end of each of these different spokes in black, where this whole wheel is a dark gray. And in motion, it actually makes it look like a much more complex wheel design, and really it's just a couple little slashes of a different color. So very clever on that end. As far as tires, these are 255/40s, and you'll find those all the way around. No matter which version of the GV70 you get, you'll have 300 horsepower. The question is 300 and what horsepower? The standard engine is a 2.5-liter turbo, putting out 300 horsepower and 311 pound-feet of torque through an 8-speed automatic transmission. But what we have here is a 3.5-liter twin turbo, giving us 375 horsepower, 391 pound-feet of torque, also through an 8-speed transmission. I have to tell you, this is a hard engine to say no to, and well, you'll probably feel that at the pump because you may be in that throttle a little bit more than you thought you would. But this isn't the only engine offering. Well, these aren't the only engine offerings for the GV70. There will be another one, but that's not internal combustion. That's the Electrified GV70, and we'll have to wait a little bit longer for that one to come out. Front seat comfort is great, but that's probably aided by the fact that we have the sport model, meaning we get more bolstering and generally a little bit more support. But we also have a lot of adjustability. 4-way adjustable lumbar, 8-way power adjustable seats, 2-way adjustable headrest, and we also have an extendable thigh cushion. So as you can see, it's really going to be hard to find a position that doesn't really work for you, whether you're a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. Things out back may not be as rosy as they are up front, but there isn't a whole lot to complain about back here. What you are going to run out of, which is pretty typical and expected with a roof line like this, is going to be headroom, but I'm not massively out of headroom. It's just in different, well, actually different levels of recline are going to go ahead and change that comfort level. But because this is reclinable, I can find a pretty good spot. I may just be an inch or so short of headroom, which means I scrunch a bit, and ultimately that's okay. As far as legroom, I have a couple inches here, but if I put this all the way back, I am going to run out. But chances are you aren't stacking the tallest person behind the tallest person, so you should be pretty good there as well. Opening a hatch these days can feel like you're trying to learn Braille, because if it's not directly center here under the lip, well, actually where this one has the rearview camera, then it's off to the left or it's off to the right. Or maybe it's built into the logo, but since we don't have a logo and instead have Genesis spelled out, all you need to do is look about 6 inches above to the rear wiper where you'll find the button there. Which means at no point do you ever have to touch the paint or a shiny polished piece that you just want to shine in the sunlight and not have your grubby little fingerprints on it. Once this is open, you do have pretty good room to stand underneath. I'm 6 feet tall and I'd be a little careful under here, but loading things in and out of the car is going to be nice and easy because you can see this also sits a few inches below my waist, so loading in and out is not a problem. The storage capacity here is going to be the same as last year, which I think is going to be plenty for your daily use. The only downside is that we're not going to have a whole lot underneath. Before I go under there, if you want to fold these seats down, the access is right here. So pull that lever and these seats will fold down. So that's nice and easy. But now that we do want to go under here, our first stage is going to be a bit of a divided layout, which means the first thing for me is that I want to know where can I put my emergency snacks, and is there room for that and maybe an emergency blanket or some flares. But if you're in bigger trouble and you find yourself somewhere stuck, the good news is that you'll actually find a spare tire back here. And even though it's not a full size, it's not the tiniest donut I've ever seen, so wherever you're stuck at, you'll probably be able to get out of there. The biggest change to the GV70 is exactly what you see in front of you, and more specifically what's laid out in front of the driver. But the rest of the interior is worth taking a look at, so we'll circle back to that in just a moment. And the reason this one is worth looking at is because we are in the 3.5T Sport Prestige, and then what that means is we're getting this exclusive interior, which may not show up terribly well on camera, but everything in here is just a little bit blue with some orange accents. And orange seems to be one of the new colors making its way back into cars, at least in a accessory role. And this is the second orange seatbelt I've tested out this month, the other one being in a Chevy. So surprised to see that Chevy and Genesis are somewhat on the same page. But that blue interior, I know we got a white background there, so it might not come through terribly well, is going to be on the lower portions. The top portion here is going to be black. And actually, that's one of the biggest ways you can tell the difference between the two. This might be a little bit better view for you there. The top is black, the bottom is this blue, but it's sort of like a faded navy blue. And between those two, but underneath that orange stitching, is going to be some changes to the ambient lighting. Now, this ambient lighting is going to run through the dash, into the doors, and across to the back doors. And obviously this is one of those things you're able to change to make sure it fits your mood, but it's done in a little bit better way and everything just seems a little bit more crisp. As far as other accents across the interior, there isn't a whole lot else going on color-wise. We obviously have some sparks of silver, and that's mainly going to be found around the door handle and highlighting the Bang & Olufsen sound system. I believe it's a 16-speaker system we have here. One of the more interesting textures is going to be found just below that, and this is near that center armrest. Obviously, your arm is on the padded section. This is going to be what looks like a really uniquely woven carbon fiber design. And I'll actually jump ahead just a second because over in the center console is where I think you can see it just a little bit better. It basically has like a 3D quality to it. If you look at this too long, you might get a little bit dizzy, but it's a really neat way to spice up the interior without doing too much or making it too flashy. And it's not black plastic, so that I will always take. Here in the glove compartment, it is a pretty large glove compartment, but since this is some of the documentation that's going to come with your Genesis, it makes sense that they need to make sure there's room for that. So once that's out, you can fit a whole lot else in there. On to the main event, and that's going to be this screen. Not just the infotainment screen, but if I slide over here, you'll see that it goes all the way over to the driver's side, and this is an uninterrupted 27-inch screen. And by uninterrupted, I mean there's no divide, there's no break here. It's just one long piece. But in software, it's basically broken up into a couple different sections, and that way, this middle section here, where it looks like there's nothing going on, is not a place that the driver can really see at all because the steering wheel is in the way. So now there isn't information tucked behind the steering wheel, but also, since this is one big touchscreen, it's a little bit interesting that only things from here and to the right are actually going to be able to be controlled by any touch functions. The software running here should look pretty familiar if you've seen any recent Kia or Hyundai models, and to me that's a good thing because we're running off of an already pretty good system, and each of these different models will just have a slightly different skin, a variation on a theme, but everything stays pretty cohesive. And when there are updates, those updates can be made to the general system and then just applied across the board. So really to me that means that this is going to be able to stay up to date a little bit more regularly, and that was a focus for Genesis because now that this is on a very similar system to what we see in the other mainstream software, it can all be combined together, and when an update comes out, it can apply to all of them. And when they want to make small tweaks, they can do it off of this one system instead of having 3 individuals, and that's just going to make everything a lot more cohesive. And in the world of software, that's only a bad thing when things go wrong all at once. As you can see highlighted here, we do have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Those are both done wirelessly, so you don't have to worry too much about tangling yourself in wires. We do have a relocated wireless charging mat, and it's going to be a lot easier to access and probably the only way you're going to want to do it because no one wants to plug in if they don't have to. Moving down here from the center screen, we'll find some physical controls. Now this bank right here is going to be how you access a lot of things in this menu without having to look too closely. So maps, navigation, radio, media, those are all the to be expected buttons. Track forward and backward, Just like the Hyundai and Kia models you find out there, it does have a star button. That star is going to be your favorite, so you can adjust what it is you are trying to access faster than diving through a menu. And then your knobs left and right are going to be volume and tune. Dropping below that is going to be your climate control, or at least 2 of the 3 zones. The zone number 3 is going to be able to be controlled there in the back. So left and right for driver, passenger. You'll also be able to control the flow for each. So left side, right side can have independent airflow. And all of this is going to be a touchscreen, but there is just a little bit of haptic feedback. Then we drop into this woven texture that I highlighted just a little bit earlier, and the first button make we're going to find is probably the buttons you'll use most frequently if you're cycling through things. Here on the left is going to be your automatic stop start button, parking sensors there in the top right, and your parking camera there in the bottom right. Now this dial in the middle here is going to be either for your drive modes or your terrain modes, and those terrain modes are new to Genesis for the GV70. If we push drive, you have options like Eco, Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus, or Individual. And as you can see, the themes change just a little bit. Individual, you get to be a little bit more creative. If you push down on that dial, it switches to our terrain modes where you see we have snow, mud, and sand. Hopefully you get to use those and not have to use those. I'll go ahead and stay here on the driver screen for just a minute because there are a number of things you can change within it. There are a number of different options you can have as far as the information being displayed on that screen. But you can also go ahead and change that theme altogether. Those themes are going to be similar to what we found in the drive modes, but you don't have to have them linked to the drive mode if you don't want to. So if you like the green, but you don't want to drive an Eco, there are going to be ways around that. Or if you want the sportier accents, but you do want to drive an Eco or just comfort, you can go ahead and make those changes there as well. One of the beauties of having a digital gauge cluster is that it gets to change if you want it to. Moving to the center console, one of the changes made for this year was in the cup holder design, and since I didn't have any issues with the cup holders on my drive, I'm just going to assume that's gone pretty well. Up above here is going to be your touch control optional controller, so if you don't want to reach over to that touchscreen, you don't have to. You can use that dial to get through the different options if that's easier for you while driving. And then just below that is going to be your drive selector, so it's a rotational knob, left for reverse, right for drive, press it for park. Everything there is nice and easy. When it comes to phone charging, that's located just behind that dial, and I'll rotate here just so you can see a little bit easier. My phone fits without issue, and we do have some charger lights to indicate that it is in fact charging. You don't have to check or double check it. And a little bit farther here, we have just a bit more storage and some USB-C charging. So 2 USB-C ports there, a 12 volt, and just enough room, and I guess a removable little container for a couple other items. Onto the steering wheel, where we do have the latest design from Genesis. They're calling this the D design, but most of us would probably call this a flat bottom wheel. Either way, this is something you'll find on some of those sportier models. The controls, however, are going to be similar between those different steering wheel designs. Over here, you'll find things like your adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, and some of the options there for the driver screen. And sliding over to the right are going to be more of your infotainment buttons. There in the top left is going to be the shortcut button that you get to set yourself. Then we have volume up and down, track left and right, answer, hang up, and your voice commands. Behind these buttons, you'll find a paddle shifter and controls for the windshield wiper. And then off to the left, you'll find a similar paddle, obviously down and not up, and the controls for not only your turn signal stock, but also your headlights. To the left of the steering wheel, just a few more buttons to be found. That's controls for opening and closing the rear hatch, turning off your traction control, a hill descent control, as well as the illumination level for that display screen. And then we'll move up to the headliner, where we won't find much out of place. We have controls for your lights, that's driver and passenger, connected services and your SOS, and then of course the controls for the moonroof that comes on this model, which is quite large. I won't open it just now because it is still a little bit muggy out there. But as you can see, I'm parked under a building here, we do have a lot of open space, and that goes to just about over the rear passenger's head, but not quite. I apologize for the close-up, folks. It is getting hot and humid here in Houston, but it's not the only thing that's hot because this little engine loves to run. And right now I have it in comfort mode. If I kick it up to Sport Plus, not only are we going to get some better throttle response, we're also going to get some different noises pitched into the cabin, and my seat just gave me a squeeze. So that means next time I floor it, we just got a lot more to experience. And I'm going to be careful because we are on an open highway and we don't want any tickets today, but with 375 horsepower, go ahead and quiet that down. It's easy to go ahead and find yourself in some trouble, but the car handles it really nicely. And the all-wheel drive system doesn't ever really feel like it's fighting against you. It's maybe not the most, race spec version. It's not built for the track, but Genesis is talking about these Magma editions coming out, and I think I'm very curious to see what a Magma version of this would be like. But when it comes to the updates, the new 2026, what's really changed? And the answer is every day, every other minute, not a whole lot, but there is some interesting technology that's been cooked in here. Things like the preview function on the adaptive suspension, which is going to be constantly reading the road in front of you and looking for things like potholes or speed bumps, and also adjusting for things like mid-corner lean, where obviously we don't want to lean a whole lot. This car is going to go ahead and basically push back to make sure that we get the best handling experience possible. And whether that be a little bit tighter or a little bit softer depending on the circumstances, it's not something you really have to worry about. But that is also going to tune in basically depending on what sort of drive mode you're in. But when it comes to drive modes, there are a few more added to this car, which have nothing to do with how fast it can go or how comfortable it is to drive. It's actually about how capable it is. Because for the first time in the GV70, we now have terrain modes. And to go along with that, we have a little bit of added protection under the car, but Genesis wasn't super clear on what that is, so I wouldn't go ahead and find your nearest boulder and see how well your car holds up to it. The point is, we can now find ourselves stuck in things like snow and mud and have a drive mode to help us get out of there, basically just adjusting the traction control to make sure that this is as capable as it needs to be. And that's really what this is doing, is just trying to take steps forward to not just keep it competitive, but to really lead the charge for Genesis. The makeover on the outside isn't really where the story is at. A lot of that's happening here in the cabin. And from the driver's perspective, this is a totally new dashboard, but it's one that's going to be familiar to folks, to anyone who's driven a Hyundai or a Kia recently, but in sort of a different layout, where those are more of a split screen design. This is one single 27-inch display that just has sort of a software split, which actually means for the passenger, it's probably a little bit nicer to look at instead of just having this cut off divide. The whole theme, whatever theme you've selected, is going to be carried throughout. As is often the case in Texas, when you're out on a drive, chances are it's a lot of highway, and that's exactly what I've been doing most of the day today. And while I didn't get as much canyon carving as I would have liked to try, because this car really wants me to go ahead and give it a try, there is a piece of technology I've really been appreciative of, and that's the active noise canceling. Because there's been a pretty concerted effort within this cabin to make this a quiet place to be. Besides making the cabin quieter, we also have a really nice sound system here. It's a 16-speaker Bang & Olufsen, and for those audiophiles, it's not one you're going to be able to tune exactly the way you want it, but for most folks who just say, I want my music to sound different, whether you want it to be more neutral or a little bit warmer, or you really want to feel that bass, or really just highlight those vocals, it's nice and easy to do so within that infotainment screen. So it may not be for the absolute audiophile, but I'm not sure everyone really qualifies. One other change before I go, and one that I've been able to test out here again on a lot of the highway driving, is the fact that they've changed the hands on the wheel attention system. So instead of it being a torque-based one, which can sometimes actually kick the system off if you torque it a little bit too hard, it's now more of a capacitive touch system, so you have to give more of a squeeze on the steering wheel than you do have to a little bit of a wiggle. And that's just going to make things a little bit easier. It's a small touch, but when the technology is getting refined, small touches are probably the right way to go. Otherwise, we should probably ditch the technology and start fresh. For a relatively new brand, Genesis is going head on with some of the top competition. The question is, have they done enough? And that's what I'm going to pose to you. If you're looking at a GV70, what is it that you came from, or what is it you're comparing against? Let me know down in the comment section below. I have to admit, for someone who's not particularly drawn to luxury offerings for myself, this Genesis checked a lot of boxes where it felt like my money was going a direction that would ultimately be worth it for me. So it might even be enough to drive some non-luxury or maybe just sort of premium-oriented buyers into the fray, although at $71,000, I would probably be looking at the lower end Sport Prestige, something like that 2.5 for myself, and that's also probably why I'd be missing that advanced suspension. Let us know down in the comment section below, did they do enough to keep this fresh? Is there another model that they should really be emulating or doing something more significant to? Or should we all just wait for the Magma model of the GV70, because we should be seeing that in the not too distant future, and I'm very curious to see what they do to turn that up to 11 or maybe even 12. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not already subscribed, you can do that down below. If you want to see that Electrified GV70 coverage, it might come to our EV channel, the EV Buyer's Guide first. And if you want to listen to us on your daily commutes, you can find us at the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast, either here on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks so much for watching. See you down the road.